Hi, my name is Clara, and when I look back on my life, it still sometimes seems amazing to me how quickly I grew up and how early I learned to take responsibility for myself. By the age of 32, I was working as a sales representative for a large company, earning a decent enough income, which was enough for me to take out a mortgage and buy the small house I had dreamed of for so long, which, despite its modest size and lack of luxury, was my true refuge, because it was located in a quiet, nice area where the morning sun gently fell on the windows, and in the evenings I could listen to the chirping of birds and feel safe. Of course, I had a family, my parents and my older sister Rita, who was already 35 and whose life had recently been quite difficult, having just gone through a divorce and been left alone with 2 children, my nephews Alberto and Valerio, 8 and 10 years old, who, though noisy and often driving our mother to exhaustion, remained her reasonette. Although Rita had a job, her salary was barely enough to cover rent and basic expenses, so I often helped her financially, convincing myself it was the right thing to do, that she truly had no choice, even though deep down I knew she had become too reliant not only on her parents, but also on me. To be honest, it's been like this my whole life since childhood. My parents always favored Rita because she was the eldest, and I remained the one who had to help and support, sacrificing myself. I remember being good at math, but not getting praised, and instead being forced to do Rita's homework instead of teaching her how to figure it out on her own. How much I dreamed of studying music and asked for piano lessons. But my parents said they could only afford one student, and naturally, she was the one chosen. How I brought home straight A's, while Rita got C's, and instead of being proud of my success, my parents again told me I should help my sister improve, as if my efforts were worthless. When Rita turned 16, they gave her a car, and when I turned 16, they told me I could share it with her, even though everyone knew the car was hers. When it came time for her to go to college, they paid for her entire education. But they told me I'd have to take out loans because Rita needed extra help. This list of injustices could go on, and perhaps that's why I learned to rely only on myself and to see everything I achieved as my own honest labor. And so, when my phone rang on Tuesday morning and my sister's name appeared on the screen, I wasn't even surprised. I assumed she was asking for money again, but upon hearing her voice, I instantly became wary. It sounded different, unusually joyful, as if she'd just won the lottery. "Clara, you know what? I quit my job," Rita almost sang, and I almost dropped the mug of hot coffee from my hands. "What did you just say?" I asked, incredulous. "Rita, what are you even thinking?" But she, inspired and seemingly elated, continued, "I've had enough." This morning I walked into the manager's office and told her straight out that I'm quitting. Without warning, without these 2 weeks. That's it, I'm free. My heart sank. "Rita, how are you going to pay the rent? What are you going to feed Alberto and Valerio?" But her peal of laughter answered, as if I'd just joked, "Oh, don't worry. You'll support me while I get some rest, recuperate, and find something better." I stared at my phone as if it were glitching out. "Sorry, what?" I breathed. "Where am I going to go now?" And Rita only encouraged me. "Come on, Clara. I've been working nonstop since the divorce. I'm exhausted. I deserve a break. You earn a good living. You have a house. You can cover my expenses for a while." My heart sank with indignation. "Rita, I'm not going to support you." "This is crazy. You have 2 children. You have responsibilities." And then her voice changed abruptly, becoming that same cold and threatening tone it always took when she didn't get what she wanted. "Well, if you don't help me yourself, I'll just call Mom and Dad. They'll make you do the right thing." And before I could respond, the line rang. I sat there holding the phone in my hands, feeling a familiar, sickening heaviness creeping into my stomach, as if all my childhood fears were returning. The same feeling I'd experienced when Rita threatened to tell my parents if I didn't comply with her whim. She always knew how to twist everything to her advantage, always running to Mom and Dad to make me give in. Less than half an hour later, the phone rang again, and a name appeared on the screen. Mom. Clara Marie Thompson, what's wrong with you? Her voice was loud and accusing, even before I could say hello. Hi, Mom. What are you talking about? I tried to remain calm. Don't pretend. Rita called me in tears and said that you refused to help her when she needed it most. How can you be so selfish? I took a deep breath and replied, Mom, she quit her job without even thinking about what would happen next. She's counting on me to take care of all her bills while she takes a break. That's unreasonable. But my mother cut me off abruptly. She's not taking a break. She went through a terrible divorce and she needs time to heal. You have a good job, you have a home. The least you can do is help your sister. Help her? I asked bitterly. Yes, support her completely until she decides to work again. No, I said firmly. Mom paused for a moment, but her words hit me like a punch in the gut. That's too bad because the decision has already been made. Rita and the boys are moving in with you. You have a big bedroom upstairs, they'll stay there. I felt as if the ground had fallen from under my feet. What? I barely managed to say. Mom, no one asked me about this. We're not asking, Clara. My mother's voice sounded like it had crashed down on me like an icy wind, leaving no hope of compromise. We're telling you. Rita needs a place to stay, and you have a spare room. Trying to remain calm, I almost whispered, Mom, this is my home, my own home, for which I pay the mortgage every month, and I'm not ready to turn it into a shelter just because Rita decided to quit her job. But my mother seemed not to hear me, or perhaps she didn't want to hear. Family helps family. Clara, Rita would have done the same for you. I laughed bitterly, though it came out more like a sob. No, Mom, she wouldn't do that. Rita never did anything for me unless it was her job. But even these words, filled with so many years of pent-up pain and truth, made no impression. I knew that if my mother had already made up her mind, there was no point in arguing. And then my father joined the conversation, his voice firm, almost emotionless. Clara, you need to clean out the bedroom upstairs. The boys will need a place for their things. I clenched my teeth, barely holding back. Dad, I don't want anyone living in my house. This is my space, my sanctuary. But he snapped. Too bad. Rita is your sister, and these are your nephews. Stop being so damn selfish. And then the connection was cut off. They both hung up, leaving me with this heavy burden on my heart. I sat in the parking lot near work in my car, trying my best not to cry, but a lump formed in my throat, and tears welled up in my eyes. That's how it always was. Rita did what she wanted, and I was the one who had to deal with the consequences. And now, she quit on a whim, without even considering what would happen next, and I would once again be left to solve a problem I didn't create. And then I remembered something. 4 months ago, my boss offered me a transfer to our company's office in a neighboring state. I declined the offer, having just bought a house and not wanting to start from scratch. But now the thought of that offer suddenly sounded like a lifesaver. What if the position was still open? Gathering my courage, I returned to the office and knocked on my boss's door. Hey, Tom, I began, trying to sound confident. Remember you mentioned transferring to the Denver office? Is that position still available? Tom raised his eyebrows and smiled with surprise. Yes. What, are you suddenly interested? Very, I replied firmly. When could I start? He leaned back in his chair and, looking at me with a slight smile, said, Hell, Clara, you could have started next week. I've been holding this spot back on purpose, hoping you'd change your mind. I didn't give myself time to hesitate. Then yes, I want to transfer. Okay, he nodded. I'll call. If it's convenient for you, you can start on Monday. As soon as I left his office, I dialed my friend Mike, who worked in real estate. Mike, hi, I need a favor, I said. Can you find tenants for my house? I need good people who will pay on time and take good care of the place. He asked, surprised. Sure, but why so suddenly? You just bought this house. I sighed. It's a long story, but I need to act really fast. Literally, this week. Okay, I'll see what I can do, he replied without further ado. I spent the rest of the day making lists and plans. If my family thought they could just dictate terms to me, make decisions for me, and control my life without even asking my consent, they were in for an unpleasant surprise this time. I acted quickly, almost desperately. I knew that at any moment my parents and Rita could show up on my doorstep with suitcases and the kids, expecting me to give in. So I had exactly 1 week to get out. I took sick leave and devoted all my time to packing. I left only the essentials: clothes, documents, a laptop, and a few cherished items. Everything else I packed into boxes and either sent to storage or left in the house for future tenants. Mike turned out to be a true friend. By Thursday, he had already found a couple with a child who were looking for a house in our neighborhood. When I met them, they seemed genuinely kind. The husband was an engineer, the wife was a school teacher, and their daughter was about 7 years old. They were ready to move in immediately and pay the first and last month's rent in advance. We signed the lease on Friday morning, and from that moment on, the rent was deposited directly into my account every month. It felt strange to realize I was renting out the house I'd fought for so long, but I knew it was the only right move. That evening, I loaded the last of my things into the car, having sent some boxes to Denver in advance, and booked a month-to-month apartment online. Saturday morning, I left for Denver, and by Monday, I started my new job. The office was smaller than back home, but the people were friendly, and the work itself wasn't much different from what I'd been used to. Tom gave me a great recommendation, and my new boss was happy to hire me. Tuesday, I spent time organizing the apartment, though it felt more like a battle against chaos. I bought groceries, got the internet connected, and put my things back in their proper places. It felt strange to be in a new state, surrounded by completely unfamiliar streets and faces, but at the same time, I felt a long-awaited release. For the first time in my adult life, my family couldn't just show up at my doorstep at any moment and dump their problems on me. On Wednesday afternoon, my phone rang and Mike's name appeared on the screen. His voice was unusually serious, almost solemn. "Clara, I have some good news for you, and perhaps some dramatic news." I sighed, of course, and said, "Tell me the good news first." "Your new tenants have moved in," he replied. "They really like your place. They've already paid this month's rent. Honestly, they seem really comfortable there. Nice people. Caring." I smiled, feeling some tension ease. "Great," I said. But then I asked, "So what about the dramatic news?" Mike hesitated, then said, "So, yesterday afternoon, a woman showed up at your house with 2 children and what looked like half a U-Haul truck loaded with things. She started knocking on the door, demanding to be let in." My stomach sank, even though I'd been waiting for this moment. "Let me guess," I said bitterly. "Was it Rita?" "I'm guessing," Mike answered cautiously. "The tenants called me because they didn't know what to do." This woman kept screaming that it was her sister's house and that she had every right to live there. And when they explained that they were renting the house from you and you'd left, she wouldn't even listen. "So what happened next?" I asked, already anticipating the outcome. "Well, then an elderly couple showed up. I think they were your parents. They all had a huge fight right there on the lawn in front of your house. The neighbors started coming out of their houses, looking, whispering. Eventually, they left, but they wrote down my number from the rental sign." I suddenly laughed, quietly, almost nervously. What I'd been afraid of, confrontation, a scene, humiliation, had happened without me, and now it even seemed funny. "So they drove all the way to my house, thinking they could just move in, and instead found complete strangers living there." "Yes, that's right," Mike confirmed. "Did they call you?" "Oh, right. About an hour later, an elderly woman, your mom, called me. She demanded to know where you'd gone. I told her I couldn't divulge that information, but she screamed that I had to because you were her daughter and she had a right to know." That night, the phone rang again. First it was Mom, her name flashing on the screen, but I just let it go to voicemail. Then it was Dad. Then it was Rita. I ignored them all. And soon the messages started coming in. "Mom, Clara, call me back immediately. We came to your house and strangers live there. Where are you?" "Dad, this is ridiculous. Clara, call us back immediately." "Rita, I can't believe you're doing this to me. I have nowhere to live and you just disappeared." I sighed, put my phone on silent, and went to bed. In the morning, when I woke up and poured myself a coffee, I scrolled through the screen. There were 12 missed calls and 23 messages. Rita, the landlord said you moved somewhere, but he didn't say where. It's all so confusing. Mom, young lady, you better explain yourself right now. Dad, you can't just run away from your responsibilities like that. Rita, Alberto and Valerio are asking where Aunt Clara went. What should I tell them? I finally decided to reply, but only to Mom, with one short message. I moved. Stop looking for me. A few hours passed, and I almost thought that was it. But that evening, a reply came from my mother. If you don't come home right now and let Rita live with you, we disown you. You are no longer our daughter. I stared at that text for a long time, and although my chest tightened painfully, I wasn't particularly surprised. I had expected something like this. Part of me felt bitterness and pain, but mostly, I felt relief. If they were willing to disown me simply because I refused to let them control my life, then so be it. I responded briefly, "Go ahead. Continue." The next few days passed surprisingly calmly. No calls, no messages. I began to think that maybe they really had given up. But then I saw what Rita posted on Facebook, and I realized it was far from over. Her post read, "Well, I guess now I understand how people can treat their loved ones. I quit my job because I was burned out and needed time to recover from the divorce, and my sister refused to help me. Now I have no income and no roof over my 2 small children's heads. Shouldn't families support each other? I guess for some people, money is more important than family." Comments started pouring in almost immediately. "Oh my God, Rita, this is terrible. Your sister seems selfish. Family should come first. I'm sorry you're going through this. Some people forget where they came from." And among the many supportive reactions, I noticed a like from my mother, which hit especially hard. But surprisingly, some of her relatives weren't supportive. Cousin Lisa wrote, "Wait, didn't you quit your job without finding a new one? And aren't you getting child support for the boys?" Uncle Mark added, "Rita, it was your decision to quit. Clara shouldn't have to decide the consequences for you." Aunt Sarah, trying to soften her tone, nevertheless noted, "I love you both, but Clara shouldn't have to support you indefinitely just because you decided to take a break." The correspondence grew increasingly heated. Rita's friends continued to defend her, accusing me of selfishness, but more and more relatives openly said that Rita had gotten herself into this situation. After all, she did receive child support from her ex-husband for Alberto and Valerio, and the children wouldn't go hungry. That evening, I sat in my new apartment gazing at the city lights outside the window and involuntarily going over everything that had happened in the past few weeks. And suddenly, I remembered something important, something I hadn't wanted to think about before. About 6 months ago, my parents called me and, almost guiltily, admitted they were in serious financial trouble. My father had been put on part-time work after mass layoffs at his company, and my mother continued working at the department store, but her earnings barely covered food and small expenses, leaving them struggling to pay their mortgage. They asked me for help, though they assured me it wouldn't last long, that everything would get better soon. Being a good daughter, I'd set up an automatic transfer to send them $800 every month to pay their mortgage. For months, I didn't even think about it, writing off the amounts automatically, continuing to work and make my plans, not considering the money a loss. But now, when my mother had told me in her own words that they were humiliating me, and Rita had publicly blamed me for her misfortunes, I allowed myself to ask for the first time, why should I even support people who treat me like a stranger? I opened my banking app and, with a trembling finger, tapped the cancel button for the automatic transfer. A confirmation of the transaction appeared on the screen. I took a screenshot and sent it to both my parents with a short but clear message. "Since you're humiliating me, I will no longer pay the mortgage for strangers." The phone rang less than 3 minutes later. My mother's name appeared on the screen. I answered and immediately heard her scream, so loud I had to move the phone away from my ear. "Clara! What did you just do? You can't do this to us. We need this money. We can't make the mortgage payment without it." I calmly replied, It looks like it's your problem now, Mom. I heard her crying on the other end of the line. Clara, please. Rita and the boys are living with us now because she has nowhere to go. We can't feed them and pay the mortgage without your help. I clenched my fists and said, then maybe Rita should get a job. Mom screamed indignantly. She's still recovering from the divorce. She needs time. She has 2 children to feed. Your dad only works part-time. It's not enough. I chuckled bitterly. Then maybe your dad should find another job or a part-time job, like normal people do when they have money problems. Mom cried even harder and suddenly screamed, "How can you be so cruel? This is all your fault. If you had allowed Rita to live with you like we planned, none of this would have happened." I froze, then firmly replied, "My fault? Rita quit on her own, unable to find a new job. That's her responsibility, not mine. And you decided to support her instead of telling her the truth. That's your choice." Mom repeated, "She's family, just like us, and you betrayed us." I sighed deeply. "I'm family too, Mom. But that didn't stop you from humiliating me when I refused to do what you wanted. You made your choice." And without waiting for an answer, I hung up and turned off the phone. My hands were shaking, but at the same time, for the first time in years, a strange feeling of lightness appeared inside. It was freedom. Freedom from always being controlled, from having someone dictate my life. For the first time in my adult life, I dared to say no and stand up for myself. The next 2 weeks were almost blissful. No one called, no one wrote, and I immersed myself in work, allowing myself the evenings to explore the new city. Denver turned out to be a surprisingly vibrant, lively, and, in its own way, cozy place. I enjoyed strolls downtown, new cafes, parks, and meetings with colleagues. My job brought in a stable and decent income, plus I was getting rent from my house, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was making it. My financial situation was better than ever, and it gave me strength. But one day, Tom, my former boss, called me. His voice was serious, almost wary. "Clara, I need to tell you about a strange incident today." I froze. "What happened?" "Your mother came to my office and insisted on meeting. She said she wants me to force you to send money to your family." My heart sank. Oh my God. What exactly did she say? "She claimed you were being irresponsible and selfish, and that as your former boss, I should either convince you to transfer money to them or just deduct it from your paycheck and send it to her." I closed my eyes and whispered, "Tom, I'm horrified. I'm so sorry. I couldn't even imagine she was capable of such a thing." He calmly replied, "Hey, don't worry. I told her straight out that what you do with your money is your business, not mine, and certainly not the company's. I also said her offer sounded like stealing." And how did she react? She burst into tears and said her family could lose their home. I felt sorry for her, but there's nothing I can do for her. I just wanted to warn you in case she tried anything else. After Tom hung up, I sat motionless for a long time, feeling a heaviness in my chest. My mother had gone so far as to show up at my former workplace and try to force my boss to steal money from my paycheck. This was a new low, even lower than I could have imagined. I spent the rest of the evening brooding, realizing they clearly weren't going to leave me alone. Rita lived with her parents and 2 children, neither of whom was working full-time, and they all now believed it was my responsibility to pay for their living expenses. So I decided to write them a long, carefully thought-out email, spending over 2 hours on it, choosing my words so that each one would be clear and unambiguous, so they would understand that this wasn't just another argument, but the last stand. I started by addressing them directly: Mom, Dad, Rita. Then I described the situation. Today, my former boss called me and said that my mother had come to his office and demanded that he steal money from my salary to transfer to you. I wrote that this was no longer just a family dispute, but actual stalking, and it had to stop immediately. I laid it out matter-of-factly. I now log every call, every message, and every attempt to contact my employers or interfere with my work. I warned you, If any of you ever contacted me at work or demanded money again, I would file for a restraining order. I explicitly stated that I had evidence, a call log from my phone, threatening and demanding texts, and my former boss's words about my mother's visit. And I added, "You said I was fired from the family and no longer your daughter. I accepted that. Now leave me alone. Any further contact will be considered harassment and will be reported to the police." I sent this letter to all three of them and immediately blocked their phone numbers. 3 days passed. Silence. Then a week, then another. And for the first time, I began to think that the threat of legal action had finally gotten through to them, that they realized the seriousness of my words and understood that I intended to defend myself to the end. One evening, my cousin Lisa called. She had always been one of the few in the family who knew how to listen and was slow to judge. "Hey, Clara, how are you in Denver?" she asked. I smiled, even sitting alone in my own home. "I'm fine, Lisa." "How are things at home?" She sighed. "Well, your family's clearly struggling. Your dad got a second job at the grocery store, stocking the shelves in the evenings. Rita went back to work. And your mom, she keeps telling everyone you abandoned your family, but honestly, most people think it's Rita's fault." I listened, feeling relief slowly build in my chest. "What do you think?" I asked. Lisa paused for a few seconds, then said firmly, "I think you did what you had to. Your family took advantage of you for too long. They needed to understand that they can't dictate your life without your consent." After we hung up, I felt like, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't plagued by doubt. Rita was working again. My father worked even harder. They all started taking some responsibility for themselves instead of dumping it on me. 3 months had passed since that letter threatening a lawsuit. 3 months of absolute silence. 3 months of the most peaceful and free life I'd ever known. One Saturday morning, I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop in downtown Denver, slowly sipping a latte and flipping through apartment listings. The rental income from my house was coming in without a hitch every month. The tenants were reliable and conscientious, taking care of the house and not bothering me with trivial matters. Combined with my salary, I was earning more than ever. The idea of buying an apartment here in Denver was becoming more and more realistic. With the rental income, I could afford a mortgage on something truly nice, something of my own, where no one would have the right to demand the keys or try to impose themselves on me. Suddenly, my phone vibrated. A message from Lisa. "I hope you're well. But I thought you should know what's going on here." I called her right away. "Hey, what's up?" I asked. Lisa didn't beat around the bush. "Your dad now works 2 jobs, part-time during the day at the office and 3 evenings a week stocking shelves at the store. He's really tired, but it's how they pay the bills. And Rita. Oh, Clara, Rita's not happy. She got a full-time job at the call center and she hates it. She's still living with her parents, and your mom says the house is cramped, downright stuffy. Rita and the boys were crammed into your old bedroom, and there are constant fights over space and privacy." I sighed heavily. "Sounds like a nightmare." Lisa confirmed, "Yes, your mom works overtime at the department store too. And, Clara, she looks older, as if these last few months have drained all her strength." I felt a slight, painful pang of guilt, as if something inside reminded me that these were, after all, my parents. But I forced myself to push it aside. "Lisa, all of this could have been avoided if they had treated me like an adult instead of making all the decisions for me," I said. She sighed. "I know. And honestly, most of the family agrees with you. Even Grandma once said that Rita's parents spoiled her too much and that it was bound to end badly sooner or later." After we hung up, I sat with my cooling coffee and thought about everything that had happened this year, about how much pain, struggle, and unexpected freedom it had brought. 6 months ago, I found myself caught in a vicious cycle where Rita's every bad decision or my parents' every failure became my own personal responsibility, and I was expected by default to fix everything, lift them up, save them, find a way out, even if I was barely keeping my head above water. Back then, it seemed I simply had no right to say no. After all, it was family, as they like to say. But everything had changed. Rita was now working full-time and managing her responsibilities on her own. My parents had finally settled down and were working to pay the bills, and for the first time in years, I could afford the luxury of living my own life without waking up every morning wondering what new crisis I'd have to navigate for them. I was sitting at my laptop looking at apartment listings. One of them caught my eye. Just 10 minutes from my office, a bright 2-bedroom apartment was for sale. It featured a balcony with a stunning mountain view and an updated kitchen I'd once only dreamed of. The monthly mortgage payment seemed manageable, given my current salary and steady rental income. I plucked up my courage, called a realtor, and scheduled a viewing for Monday. That same afternoon, I received a notification that this month's rent had been deposited. And when I logged into my banking app, I saw a balance that made me smile without worry for the first time. Instead of constant stress and shortages, I was now saving more money than ever. In my hometown, I'd sent Rita money every month, plus $800 to my parents for the mortgage, which added up to over $1,000, which wasn't going toward my future, but toward other people's mistakes. It's no wonder I was constantly living under financial stress. Now everything was different. I could think about retirement savings, about building real wealth, and not just about plugging holes. I opened an investment account, started saving every month, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was building a future, not just reacting to other people's emergencies. On Sunday evening, I purposefully explored the neighborhood where the apartment was located. Good schools, low crime rates, cozy cafes, shops, and restaurants within walking distance. It all looked perfect, as if time itself was telling me, it's time. On Monday morning, I met with a realtor. The apartment in person was even better than in the photos. The hardwood floors softly reflected the light, the huge windows filled the rooms with air, and the mountain view made me think, this is where I want to watch the sunrise. We spent over an hour going over the paperwork and discussing financing, and I realized that with my income and rental property, I could get a favorable mortgage. I had the option of putting down 20% up front and still leaving a decent reserve for unforeseen circumstances. That evening, I submitted my application, and the next day I received news. The seller had accepted it. A week later, Lisa called. "You know, Rita's been telling everyone you ruined her life," she said, and I heard irony in her voice. I laughed. And how did I ruin it? By letting her work and support the kids like any adult? Lisa laughed too. Exactly. But she's sure that if you'd let her live with you for a couple of months, she'd have found a great job and everything would have been wonderful. I chuckled. Or she'd have been sitting on my couch for months, watching Netflix and spending my money. It's just easier for her to blame me than to admit her mistakes. What about your parents? I asked after a pause. How are they? Lisa replied. They're still working hard to pay the bills. Your mom mentions you sometimes, but not as often as she used to. I think they're starting to understand that you're not coming back. I quietly said, and they're right. I'm not coming back. 2 weeks later, I signed all the papers and closed the deal on the apartment. When I first walked into my new living room, put my bag on the floor and went to the window to look out at the mountains, I experienced a feeling I'd never known before. It was complete independence. The phone was silent. No one demanded money, no one begged me to solve someone else's problem, no one manipulated me with guilt. In recent months, I've realized the most important thing. Setting boundaries isn't cruelty or selfishness, it's a necessity. My family took advantage of my willingness to help and probably would have continued to do so until the end if I hadn't said my firm no. Rita was now working and providing for herself. My parents were coping with their difficulties on their own. And for the first time in many years, I was building a life that was truly mine. A life in which I chose where I went and who I allowed to walk beside me.